Hi, from Daily Exchange, sitting here with Anton Buenavista, self-described code monkey at Kyber Network.
Hello, everyone.
Liquidity protocol is Kyber Network.
Yes.
What does that even mean?
So Kyber Network is essentially a on-chain liquidity protocol, and it has two key features, which is allowing anyone to contribute liquidity into this protocol, and also allowing anyone, like developers or users, to access this liquidity in whatever use that they may need it in, like maybe in their own apps, or maybe just doing a simple swapping service, or etc. But yeah, I mean, like the key function, right, that we provide is decentralized token swaps, where a user can swap from one token to another. So a good example would be KNC, which is our own native token, and they would want to swap it into DAI, which is a stable coin. Yeah.
And how do you go about aggregating this liquidity?
Yeah, so I guess one of the biggest key points of what Kyber is that everything is fully on-chain. So both the conversion rates of the different tokens and the liquidity itself is all on-chain. And what that basically means is that this protocol, right, can be easily integrated by any dApp or application, because you know that there's this limitation within the blockchain where smart contracts can only talk with other smart contracts. And so it makes sense for other smart contracts to talk with our protocol, because they're able to access all this on-chain liquidity and information straight away, right, seamlessly. Currently there have been a bunch of dApps or DeFi projects that have integrated the protocol. So to name a few, right, some of them are like InstaDApp. We have a new network, like this margin lending protocol. And a bunch of others, actually. And we actually have this monthly newsletter that we put out. We call it our ecosystem report. And in there, we detail all the different projects that have integrated us, and as well as the different liquidity providers that is providing liquidity in our protocol to power this whole ecosystem of DeFi in the blockchain space. So yeah, I mean, it's been pretty exciting year, especially since DeFi has been picking up.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're working on a bunch of other things. Yeah.
I guess stepping back.
Yeah.
The liquidity is provided by users of the Kyber network.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sure. So basically, liquidity can be provided by anyone, and we have something called reserves, right? So reserves are just basically smart contracts, and these smart contracts are what hold the different inventory, let's say DAI and Ether, and they serve this liquidity back into the network, right? And so these reserve contracts are managed by different reserve managers, or we call them reserve managers. And it could be anyone. So one reserve is handled by us, the Kyber team. There are other professional market makers that are operating their own reserves. And there are also other token teams, these teams that have maybe done an ICO or an IEO, or basically have this, their own native token, and they would want to provide liquidity to the ecosystem by operating their own reserve, right? And the incentive of being or operating a reserve, especially for these market makers, is that they can set their own prices and therefore be able to earn from the spread that they set. And for this token teams that are listing their token on Kyber, their token is then accessible in any of these DeFi projects that is accessing Kyber's liquidity. So you can imagine, let's say a token A that has listed in Kyber, and you have this many different dApps that are integrated in using Kyber or Kyber's protocol. They are able to access this token's liquidity then, so they can have multiple use cases. So like DAI, right? DAI is one of the most used tokens around Ethereum. DAI is being used in all these different DeFi projects, both in lending, borrowing, margins, many different asset management, DeFi projects, etc. So yeah, so that's kind of the value prop of being or having the token listed in Kyber, and being a reserve manager. So that's the side of being a reserve manager. Now for developers, right? We have this ecosystem of, in Ethereum in particular, there's this large ecosystem of many different tokens, right? So with the boom of Ethereum, everyone kind of like wanted to create their own token, and these tokens have different utilities in themselves, right? And for the end user, it doesn't make sense for them to hold every token out there, because like if you check Etherscan, there's probably over like 200,000 tokens out there right now. So it doesn't make sense for them to hold like several tokens in their wallets. Their interest may be just to use like certain services. And so we provide the service, right, of being able to let users swap instantly from one token to another, such that they, for example, can just hold stable coins like a USDC or DAI or maybe even ETH, and then they can use other platforms that may require their own native token. There's this NFT platform that requires their own native token to pay for NFTs. And so the user doesn't need to, go to an exchange, right? Like a centralized exchange, let's say like exchanges out there. Maybe I won't name some, but they don't have to buy that token anymore. They can just use that dApp straight away. And because that dApp has integrated Kyber, they are able to just buy, that NFT straight away with DAI or whatever stablecoin they may have. And we, in the background, facilitate this token swap, completely transparent to the user. Yeah.
And so the actual cost of swapping the token would be determined by whatever buy and sell prices these liquidity providers currently have on their settings.
Yeah, sure. So liquidity is always guaranteed before execution. So the user is always aware of like the conversion from one token to another, or the conversion rate of it. And so once the user agrees with this conversion rate, then he just needs to agree that this will be executed. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can set it up, if you are one of these providers putting liquidity into the protocol, that you can essentially be sure of making some mild profits going forward as you...
Yeah, sure. So of course, these different liquidity providers, right, or market makers have their own strategies of how they price their own tokens. We have our own strategy for operating our own reserve, and others as well. Others may not be keen on doing like market making. Like token teams, right? All their interest is listing their own token in Kyber, right? So that there's tokens used in many different aspects of the DeFi ecosystem, and so they may opt into using another reserve type, which we call our automated market making reserve, or automated pricing reserve. And this model is quite similar to like Banco or Uniswap, where you have a smart contract that manages the prices for you as trades happen. So as a user buys or sells or swaps from one token to another, then the price automatically adjusts based on a pricing curve, and it's handled fully by the smart contract. So they don't have to worry about like how prices are done for these token teams.
Okay,
yeah,
cool. So it's like just instant on-demand liquidity for basically any token. Is it just in only the F ecosystem, or?
Yeah, so currently right now, we definitely started in Ethereum, like way back a couple of years ago. But we're definitely like branching out into other major blockchains, or we're continually exploring those. So right now we have our protocol deployed in EOS as well. Because I think one thing we notice is that there's this growing ecosystem of many different tokens in EOS as well, and we'd want to be one of those projects that providing liquidity for this other DeFi projects or other projects that is growing in EOS. So that's one side, and kind of like the big vision for us is that we want to be that layer of being able to provide liquidity, right, for this many different projects. So we want to, in the long run, provide a service where users can do cross-chain swaps. So let's say a user would want to trade some EOS token to some Ethereum token, and this all happens, on-chain in a decentralized and a transparent way. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So that does fulfill a major need for app developers.
Yeah, definitely.
Just the ability to not have to force their own tokens onto users as kind of a friction point before onboarding them.
Yeah. So we're kind of like in this philosophy of like being a financial primitive, right, or a thin protocol that anyone would can integrate in their own application, right? And this key feature where dApps would need like a kind of like a swapping service, right, or any swapping function, we'd be able to provide that for them in any of this like a major blockchain. Yeah. Well, right now we're mostly on Ethereum and EOS for now. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So right now, I guess the obvious application is the current somewhat sparse, if we're being honest, DApp ecosystem, right? Not too many users there yet.
Yes.
Going forwards, right, you have other applications shortly for this fully automated on-chain swaps.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular looking forward to?
I mean, like in the DeFi space specifically, there's a lot of like new things that we've never seen like happen, right? Like, well, right now there's a large, amount of like lending and borrowing protocols, but there's like asset management projects out there as well, like Melonport. There's Set Protocol, for example, that's quite interesting as well, where they create like sets of different tokens, and yeah, I mean, like Nuo network is there as well for if you can go like margin long and margin short of a particular token. Um, we have a long list actually, so some of them like just fly over my head. So we also have like payment use cases where you're kind of like a vendor, right? And you want to sell like digital goods or services, and being able to use like different tokens for as payments as payment, and then we'd be able to facilitate that. We have like platforms that have some kind of service, let's say like a cloud computing, right, as an example, right, and they have their own native token, and instead of like users having to buy their own that project's native token in some exchange, they can just use Ether, and then they can immediately use that that project services. There's a bunch of others, like you can use it for maybe arbitraging against other dexes or exchanges as well. So those who are more of like in the trading side of things, they can build like arbitrage applications. We have also kickstarted WBTC, Wrap Bitcoin, if you've ever heard of it. So that's kind of the aim of the project is basically being able to bring in liquidity from other major blockchains like Bitcoin. And of course, like one of the biggest challenges of Bitcoin is that it's not a smart contract platform, right? So so we need to, but Bitcoin's like a quite popular, or very, very popular, the number one, right? And we'd want to like tap into that liquidity as well and bring that into the DeFi space, such that you can use wrap Bitcoins in all these different DeFi projects. Yeah, so Kyber, along with some other projects like Bitco and Ren, have kickstarted these projects, and we have actually a bunch of like ecosystem partners as well that helps grow this ecosystem. And so not just stopping there, right? We're actually exploring more options, right? So not just like in wrap Bitcoins and EOS, but trying to in smart contract blockchains, being able to deploy Kyber there, and then maybe looking to other major blockchains, for example, Zcash or Monero, etc., and maybe being able to bring their liquidity into smart contract-based blockchains like Ethereum in a wrap token version of it. Yeah, I mean, but that's kind of like in an exploratory phase of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine wrap Monero would be interesting.
Yeah.
Technically interesting, right?
Yeah. So there are actually a lot of things you can definitely do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess as you go on this whole great big DeFi ecosystem, and Kyber network aims to be throughout it as just the liquidity on demand.
Yes.
All these applications as needed.
Yeah, definitely. And there's I guess like one of the biggest things about being a project in this DeFi space is composability, right? Where a new project can come in and then they can compose all these different protocols into a new project, and that's actually happening. And we've been seeing that with new projects that have been coming into this space. So that's a great thing, and we definitely try to reach out more to this different projects. So it's basically good for the ecosystem where each one is all kind of like a collaborating, like in a sense, in the sense where or how they operate or grow their project. Yeah.
Do you feel like it's more collaborative than it used to be?
Yeah, definitely. So so one thing I wanted to add as well is that in our model, right, where we're aggregating liquidity, we can actually we can actually integrate with other liquidity sources as well, such as Uniswap or Oasis Dex from Maker. So we can actually pull additional liquidity from Uniswap, Oasis Dex, or Bancor, or let's say like DotchX, for example. So let's say you have a user that has a high demand of DAI or some stablecoin or some other token that may be present in other integrated liquidity providers, then we can actually pull from there. Yeah. So yeah, everyone's pretty much like collaborating in that sense. Yeah.
So if you can pull liquidity from all these sources. All these sources are people who own those assets there.
Yeah.
They get a cut of the spread, I guess, on the buy and sell prices they set. Presumably, it's got very tight once you have a much bigger ecosystem.
Right. So I think in our perspective, right, let's say when we integrate like Uniswap, right, we don't add to that spread there so that, we profit from it. We're more of like just being able to facilitate liquidity for all our users, because we think of Kyber Network as a single endpoint that any user or dev can use to access liquidity. And, you just leave it to us to access liquidity from all these various sources. We just aggregate it for you. Yeah. But of course, like, there's a role for these reserves, right? So to be able to participate in our network, they actually need to pay a fee to the protocol itself in KNC tokens. So they only need to pay a 0.25% of the volume, the traded volume in KNC tokens. And this tokens is eventually burned. So we don't take any of it. So it just gets burned. Yeah.
So that's the people who are trading using this, or the people who are providing liquidity?
So those who are providing liquidity. So for the users who are just, using the service or just accessing this liquidity, they don't pay any additional fees at all. They actually just have to pay for the gas fees.
So presumably the profits made by these liquidity providers,
yes,
that would depend, I guess, on the size of the user base at any given time and the spreads they can take.
the spreads that they set. Yes.
So if these aren't sufficient enough, the profits, then what's the incentive to keep providing liquidity rather than, lend out your crypto holdings to a different platform?
I mean, it really depends on their own strategy. Like, there could be professional market makers out there that are seeing more profits in being able to market make aside from just, being able to like lend it and earn interest from it. And I guess that's what we've seen. So that's why they market make in Kyber. And well, for those who are like token teams, right, and who list their tokens or like create or operate a reserve in Kyber, their interest is really just being able to provide liquidity for their own token. So they may not be profit, driven in that sense. They just want to have their token have as much use as possible in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was always wondering about that. And it does clear that up.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like, every day probably there's some token out there that's being created, and so you want this token to have liquidity and be used somewhere. So
I guess it's much better than just airdropping it to all the random Ethereum wallets you can find.
Yeah, and we do like help projects on that. So we created actually a widget that can be integrated in any like e-commerce website or any website, and immediately by integrating that widget, they can accept any token as payment. So one example would be like a conference, right? And instead of paying just normal US dollars for a conference ticket, you can actually pay with some X token. Yeah.
So it's available right now, and you can just download that widget, add it.
And just simply integrate it. It takes less than 30 minutes or 20 minutes,
Neat.
Yeah, and the vendor just receives, whatever token that they want to receive. So if they want to receive DAI, then they're just going to receive DAI. And we just facilitate that swap in the background.
Nice.
Yeah.
So do you see, I guess stablecoins are in a sense wrapped fiat currencies.
Mm-hmm.
So if the merchant wants to get that immediately into US dollars, and just be stablecoins would be the closest approximation.
Right. So stablecoins would definitely be the best approach for now. We're not actually in the business of being able to off-ramp users from crypto to fiat, let's say. We try to instead work with other projects that would do best in that. We're more of like being able to provide really good services from crypto to crypto.
Yeah.
So
going forwards, do you foresee this having applications in, for example, fully autonomous payments? One drone needs to make a delivery, it gets paid up front, it has to change the delivery to a second drone en route, that drone takes it away. With Kyber Network, could you just basically use any tokens you want and have these fully autonomous machine payments?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I could definitely imagine projects out there that could be creating such a system, right? And then they just, integrate Kyber for this multi-token use case. But for sure, I hope that I get to see some of them. I guess we're still quite a long way because we're still like figuring out a lot of the difficult problems that is being faced in space, especially like, we're trying to still solve big problems like scalability. Like that's kind of like the biggest ones, like especially when we're, approaching like the new upgrade of ETH 2.0, like how's that going to look like? So there's definitely still a lot of challenges out there, especially like with cross-chain as well. Like in how you do cross-chain in such a way where it's really decentralized and trustless and transparent. Because right now most cross-chain approaches are they exist like atomic swaps, but they're quite cumbersome. Like the user experience not quite nice. And there are other approaches where there's a trusted component, like there's a centralized part of it. So it's not really fully decentralized. So there's really a couple of trade-offs when you're trying to implement such a system. And we just, we're trying to work on a fully decentralized solution in those things. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't want to sacrifice the important parts before you can begin, right?
Yeah. So I mean, like we try to be we're being very collaborative with other projects that we're working on several areas in this space, like in scalability, security, and what have you. Yeah. So it's in this space generally, even with this bear market, right? I found that everyone's really working hard. The number of devs have been increasing, and it's just really collaborative. And you can actually see this when you attend like hackathons. The amount of like new developers coming into the ecosystem is quite quite exciting. Yeah.
Yes, people get their head around applications.
Yeah.
And potential uses.
Yeah.
I suppose being entirely on-chain, scalability might be the biggest problem.
Yeah,
right
so
now.
definitely. So I mean, we're quite reliant on the base chain, right, or the features of like Ethereum in general. So if Ethereum doesn't scale, then we don't scale in that sense because we're operating the base chain. So definitely, when it comes to a point where the space has grown so much and scalability becomes a really big issue, right? Where the whole network is just congested all the time, then we would definitely need to look into more drastic measures like second layer solutions and Plasma, for example, side chains. But I'm sure like with the current progress of research, we may get to a point where like ETH 2.0 might arrive quite early enough to alleviate all this problems that we're having. Yeah.
It's well underway.
Yeah.
So would you say that one of the core functions of Kyber Network is to enable seamless on-chain swaps of tokens, and the aggregate liquidity is a means to an end? Or
I would say like I mean, you can say that like it's really a means to an end because that's basically the model that was designed from the start, like being able to have this aggregate liquidity and being able to have this function of swapping between tokens. Yeah.
I guess aggregate liquidity protocol is
yeah.
mouthful, but
cross-chain
swaps.
Quite a mouthful, yeah. So we just say token swaps, as simple as that.
I guess so. It's tough to think about what happens on the back end to make these token swaps actually work, and how it does become a human-powered system down the line as you try to make this happen. Market makers, liquidity providers.
Yeah. I mean, everything for us is in the smart contract, so anyone can just inspect the smart contract and see how the code works. They're all verified. Like if you view Etherscan and see our smart contract addresses, you can see all the code there and what's actually happening. You can see transactions of where like the ingress of one token, the egress, where it goes to, right? Or what's how does the swap happen? So yeah, it's all fully transparent. Anyone can inspect it to make sure that no funny business happens. Yeah. So that's kind of like the biggest feature we can provide, right, by being able to take advantage of the blockchain, that everything's just transparent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea of the liquidity being the means to the end.
Yeah.
Do you know how this solution was devised? What the creative process behind it, thinking, okay, how do we solve this problem? I know, aggregate liquidity. Was that an extensive process? Did you consider other options?
Actually, it was devised by our co-founders, right? All our founders. So there's three of them. So there's Loy, Yaron, and Victor. So they're the founders of the Kyber network. And Loy actually is, has a PhD in this field, basically, like in cryptocurrency and such. So even before like Ethereum exploded, they were doing a lot of research already in this field. And so I guess during that time there was a lot of pain points that was being solved, right? Like especially when tokens were already being introduced into this ecosystem. Maybe during that time there wasn't as much tokens then, but it was already like an obvious problem that needed to be solved. And so several projects, right, attempted to solve this problem. So Kyber opted for the reserve type of model. Others like 0x, right? They have their off-chain component of being able to match orders and then just settle on chain. Then you have AirSwap. So yeah, everyone has their own like way of like addressing this key problem of being able to exchange different tokens in the blockchain. And everyone is still like operating and being able to collaborate as well in different use cases. So for example, there are other DeFi projects that are able to pull liquidity not just from Kyber but from, let's say, like 0x and AirSwap as well. So yeah, I mean it's very collaborative in that sense. Yeah, we're both like collaborating and competing in a way, right, with these different models. Yeah.
So if you had another protocol aggregating liquidity from the separate aggregate liquidity providers, is it aggregate liquidity all the way down?
Yeah.
There's one big one in the bottom.
Yeah. I guess so. Like just aggregate everything. Yeah. I mean, of course, like it's not as simple as just being able to just take parts. Whenever you work with the blockchain, there's always like trade-offs that you have to make because working in the blockchain or being a developer in the blockchain, right? You always have to work in an adversarial environment where everyone could be a potential bad actor. They could like play around or like hack your, I don't know, like do something with your smart contract such that it can like game your system where they are getting an advantage, right? So those are like a lot of considerations when creating this like system. Yeah.
So would you say that's one of the big hurdles for someone trying to move to being a blockchain developer? It's just a need to accommodate, to get used to working in a purely hostile environment, essentially.
Essentially, yes. Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot there who can just like create bots, and they could either DDoS your system, or like find some loophole right in your contract where they can siphon off funds, which is like one of the worst cases you can possibly have, or game your system in such a way where they can like front run your prices, etc. So I mean, there's a lot of considerations for sure. Yeah. And that's kind of like both what's exciting about working in this space and what's really difficult.
Yeah. I guess there's solutions coming to that as well. People are developing new programming language. People are working on how to make it's all part of the developer accessibility umbrella. I guess.
So I mean, moving from that, right? One of the key problems that needs to be solved is governance as well, and we're kind of trying to explore that side as well, where we're creating our own DAO. We've actually done 2 DAO experiments in the past, experimenting on the Aragon platform and DAO Stack. So we're just trying out and experimenting on their platforms, and of course like exploring more in the future. And the end goal is just basically being able to have a governance structure where the community can help decide on things, right? Like maybe the changing of the burn rate or the rate that reserves pay, or any other aspect of the network. And it's exciting to see other projects that attempt to solve this problem. So we always follow the space as well. We're also excited we follow closely other cross-chain projects like Cosmos or Polkadot and see like what they're doing as well. So I mean like I think it would be hard for one project to just build everything themselves. They really need to be collaborative in this space because again, like working in an adversarial environment, right? There's a lot of different difficult problems to solve. So it's really just best to be collaborative in nature. To work with other projects.
So how's the Kyber network liquidity pool? Is it growing over time?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So in our ecosystem report, you can actually see a very like obvious trend of uptick trend, where both the volume and the number of users that we've been accumulating in the past like months have been growing. And we actually reached a milestone like a few weeks ago, like I think 2-3 weeks ago, where we burnt our first 1 million KNC. 2 million KNC. So it took us about 13 months, I think, or close to a year, more than a year, to burn 1 million KNC. And with the growth of like the volume, right, it only took us about 3 months to burn the next million. Yeah. So we're hoping that the next million would be within or less than 3 months. So that's kind of like a clear indication that volume has been growing. The number of users that are using the protocol has been growing. The number of users in this entering the space, especially that are using the Ethereum blockchain, has been growing. So it's pretty exciting. Yeah,
that is. Well, exciting things are afoot.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. So, despite the bear market, it's actually been very busy for us. Yeah. All hands on deck all the time. So, yeah.
There's definitely a lot going on.
Yeah. A lot of going
behind
on.
the scenes in a way.
Yeah. And just this week, right, we have Invest Asia here in Singapore, and we have the Consensus event coming up as well.
right.
Recently, there was the Berlin Blockchain Week, and then DevCon coming up as well in Osaka this October. So, crypto never sleeps. There's always packed events every week, every month.
Yeah.
Always new stuff happening. So it's actually quite daunting to sometimes keep up with this space. Yeah. But that's the great thing.
Yeah. Well, super. Thank you very much for joining us, Anton.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah.
Kyber Network. Exciting things afoot.
Thank you.